Hi. So I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourself and tell me the title of your piece.
So it's actually got two names because originally it was called Looking Out, Looking Over, and then last year I kind of made a little intro, an additional intro to it, and kind of like a response to the original piece, looking back at it with my mum, who was kind of the main feature of it, where it became called Looking Out, Looking Back Again,
And what's your name?
Peter Basma-Lord.
I'm really excited to dig into the sort of making and then the revisiting being a process of the piece, because that's also maybe one of the features we're trying to uncover in this archive itself.
Mm.
But tell me when did you make the original and when did you come back to it?
So the original was in 2020. It was kind of I'm trying to remember now when I actually shot the original videos, but it was basically the first half of 2020 was the first was it. I originally produced started producing the interviews for it without any intention of what I would do with them. Um and then the redoing was then 20, is that right? No, I'm so wrong.
I think you
Apologies.
showed it at New Art City, the first New Art City Festival, which was 20 like early 2021.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm 1 year out. It was the first half of 2021 because I was thinking it was already deep pandemic when I was doing this.
Mhm.
So it was the first half of 2021, and then the revisiting was pretty much a year later exactly. So 22.
So we're now sort of contributing another cycle to this.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so tell me more about your workflow for creating the piece. I would love to hear more about the sort of process of interviewing and then installing.
So the interviewing was something I'd thought about for I think a lot of people probably have thought about it, but just this idea of archiving. I think the initial idea was just I would like to have an archive of my parents, particularly my mum's history, um, before it's not easy to produce that. Um, and basically, it was just a case of I want to gather this kind of footage over the next. I was home. We had a few days, and we kind of planned out that okay, we're gonna do. I think 3 days we did 3 days of kind of sitting down and long form just talking. Um, and I shot it all I shot it all on a GoPro, single shot, just kind of really long form, like shooting. I think we did about 4 hours a day, for 3 days, and it was just having a conversation, um, about how it was growing up. Kind of not really trying to kind of look at it chronologically, but not with any none of it was too kind of like fixed. It was all just sort of okay, we start there and then you meander over here and then you meander over there. And a lot of it was sort of, these are stories. I would say 70% of what we ended up talking about, we probably spoke about it before, at different times, but I think maybe with less detail and less clarity and definitely less kind of connection. And it was quite at times it was quite emotional, but I think the idea was to keep all of that in and just kind of keep going with it. And also the kind of breaks, I quite in the end it's not meant to be it was never meant to be some sort of like perfect polished thing. It was just meant to be a video of a conversation with my mum. Really. So then I got all these hours of footage and kind of I was wondering what to do with them. And I think it was around a similar time I found New York City. And it actually kind of landed up perfectly because I had this idea of wanting to kind of it's always been sort of in a way part of the practice, kind of let the audience uh find their own way through things. Because what I didn't want to do was just sort of present a kind of just a video of this interview, rather pull out sections, and let the audience kind of find their own way through, build their own journey, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's really one of the shining examples of like a really creative way to show video in a virtual space that's super like authentic to the medium that like the interviews itself seem to be like not really governed by linear notions of time, or like showing this kind of associative quality to memory. And
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, I loved the way that you have these shorter snippets that are installed all around. So you did, it's not enforcing a linear narrative, and you can kind of find your way into different parts of this conversation. Um, and I mean, I also love that like it wasn't necessarily even conceived of as an art piece to begin with, that it began as something personal and it like found a destination after it was made. I just love things like that.
I was really glad about that as well because honestly, it's not normally. I think sometimes, you know, you can want to make something, it can be a bit contrived. You can already have kind of like you can have it made before you've even touched the things. And it was quite nice to let myself work completely opposite to that. And I think it also has led me to doing that more. Um, yeah, which has been great, really. And I think as well the medium, like for me, I've always thought about using games or interaction as a sort of like means of disarming, or I suppose kind of foiling the kind of hopefully foiling the idea the audience coming to the work with too much of a kind of like I don't know, too much of a veil between them and the thing. Just like being like, here's just a thing, and you can mess about with it, and it's not about making it too it's not about making it a small deal. It can still be a big deal, I think, but just making it yeah, more accessible for want of a better word, really.
Hmm. And yeah, I mean, I'm curious sort of what your practice was like before the pandemic, or like how the pandemic affected it.
Mm. Um, Mostly they killed it, I would say. Almost. I mean, it was a lot of contributing things. Um, I graduated 2018 and then kind of uprooted life, moved to Berlin, had a year here, really practical, boring things, trying to make money, etc. And a lot of life got in the way. And then it seemed just as I was on the cusp of kind of returning to my practice, then the pandemic hit. Um, and yeah, it just took over. And I think although that was kind of difficult at the time, I think it was probably one of the things that pulled me back towards doing this because it was sort of okay, what do you have? What can you access? And luckily, like I was able to travel at the time. For a long time, I think for a year I didn't see family. And then when I could, this was actually I think the first time going back and seeing them physically, which kind of encouraged further this idea of like you should do this now before there's a chance you can't do it. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And had you worked in virtual space before this?
I mean, yes, in parts with like but in the past more text adventures, sort of visual text adventures to an extent, working a lot with Twine and kind of like altered versions of that. Also a little bit of kind of game world stuff in Unity, working in kind of really hacking together like some VR stuff, but rudimentary. And I think the thing with New York City that was refreshing as well, and why it kind of fitted so nicely, is that I've always worked with a lot of different technology. I've never kind of sat with one kind of medium, but as a result, it can often take either a long time to make something with depth, or you have to make things without at least technical depth. And what I found with New York City was like, in like 5 minutes, I can just build a world that I can be in, and I can move my things around, and I don't really have to learn anything for that. So it kind of was just like, okay, I'm gonna use this. Yeah,
That's really nice to hear. Or yeah, it's like kind of like frees you up to think when you're not thinking about like all of these complex lights and mechanics and stuff.
exactly. Yeah, like, and I enjoy that part of it. And perhaps it can be fun to geek out about things, but when it's sort of like you can kind of what you want to make, and you don't want the stuff to get in the way. Rather, you just want to put that thing there, and then you can. It's quite cool.
Mm. So I really like that returning to this space is like a part of your process. And so I'm curious sort of what it felt like to return to make the piece that we're talking about today?
Mm.
And maybe what does it feel like to come back now?
It's actually quite grounding. It's weird because before today I hadn't looked at it probably for like I don't know, at least a few months, maybe like half a year or something. Not pro. I mean, I'd maybe like visited it for a second to show someone, but I hadn't sat down and gone back through and really explored it, for like for an hour or two. And yeah, it's beautiful. It kind of does. I mean, on a totally selfish level, it does what I wanted it to do, which functions as this like archive, but also kind of I don't know. I don't want to call it like a memory box. I think that's too kitsch, but it's like there is something quite. I think there's something melancholic in the whole thing, but I think also that there's warmth alongside that. And actually, and yeah, purely on a selfish level, that kind of like melancholy and warmth come together for me in it. And it's like I can see my mum in it and my family and kind of like the strands of that. And for me, I think that's doing what I wanted to do.
That's a great answer. I love when people are like, "Yeah, it feels great. I like it and I'm proud of it." It's like,
Yeah,
hell yeah.
basically that I would say. I mean, I think as well, like going back over I think there was this idea when I was making this, and I think with a lot of the things that I've made in the past, but particularly with this, it was like, who am I to like show this? Who gives a shit ultimately about like looking at some videos of interview with my mum? But I guess the idea behind it was like that. I hope that there's like a generosity in it, and I hope that can be like, okay, here you go. Here's not just a small window, but I guess quite a large one into like a private relationship. And it's not to say like, look how interesting this relationship is, or look how interesting this life was, but rather like all of them are, and all the parts of them are, the big bits and the small bits, and like, and it's all okay, like you can. I, I think it's a bit glib to say, but I think ultimately it's kind of a bit like, like, and you can do it too. You can go and explore whatever the relationship is you want to explore. You can with yourself or with a family member or with the world or whatever. Like it all kind of matters.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I mean, it's very generous, but I think I agree with the sentiment as well that like there is value in the way that your personal archive can become like a touchstone for memory.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I mean, my last question is more head on. Like, how do you think about archives in your work? What do you think about the archival impulse, right?
It's quite. I think at times it can be a little bit crippling. Because I know for myself, just in terms of like practice, in terms of like daily practice and weekly, monthly, yearly practice, this idea of kind of like gathering and recording and there's some sort of like sense of like arbitrary weight to it that like no, of course I should keep my diary, and I should also, I mean, I keep it's a bit. I don't know if other people do this, but like I keep like box folders. I have a box folder for each of the last like 10 years, and in each box folder is a plastic wallet for each month. And in each plastic wallet is like all of the sort of like bits and detritus that I've gathered over that month, and I just put them in the wallet. And it's like I'll probably never look at these again, and probably no one will ever look at them again. But some part of like keeping those seems important to me.
Are these
And
physical plastic wallets?
yes,
Oh, that's so cool.
I think it's mad though, and I love it. Like it's nice to then look back at it and be like, "Oh yeah, cool." Like those things are there. I think in a way, no. I mean, I think that's making too big a statement. I was going to say that they're more important than the diary and stuff. And I think when the gathering these bits of paper and stuff, and when the keeping the diary, and when you know organizing photographs or whatever, or playlists or whatever it is, however you archive, like I think when they're functioning well is when they when you let when they can happen kind of of their own volition. I think if you're forcing them, maybe there's something kind of like beauty in that kind of like rigor, but I think ultimately things come out of them quite stiff. And I think if you just kind of say with a journal, you just let it happen. Maybe you write it once in it in a year. At least you did, and and the fact that you did is also maybe a record of something. There's a really interesting place in Glasgow in the CCA, called the CCA, sorry, the Centre for Contemporary Art. And before they were the CCA, they were the Third Eye Centre. And I don't want to like misremember what the actual like how it's set up. So I vaguely, my understanding, if I remember rightly, is that the Third Eye Centre ended for whatever reason, and out of kind of the ashes came the CCA. And the archive that they have of the Third Eye Centre, or perhaps the first iteration of the CCA, I can't remember exactly how it works, but the format of their archive was just everything that was on one shelf got swept into like one like legal box, like, and then that was what's in there. And then everything that was on one desk got swept into one legal box, and that's what's in there. And it means, practically using the archive is difficult at times, but also it means that you find it's way more, I don't know, alive in a way, because you get one box and it's got a paperclip and a photograph in it, and you get another and it's got like 20 copies of some old newspaper, and I don't know, I think that to me is a more interesting thing than overly kind of like rigorous critical archiving.
That's really fascinating. I mean, I was talking about this with some undergrads over the weekend even, where it's like Google really wants you to click the first search result, right? That it'll try
Mm.
to spoon feed you the information. And it's like, it's hard to overstate the difference even between that and going to a library, which is kind of the latter kind of a more stuffy
Yeah.
archive where it's like the structure of it determines what's there. But simply seeing the ideas or like the books that are on the same shelf
Mm.
it's yeah, it's extreme. It's just a totally different phenomenon of accessing and seeking information. But then
Totally.
moving further into this, like just box by box of like what a human perspective deemed to be similar is like that
Yeah.
capturing that perspectival seeing is what's beautiful to me.
Totally, and even just like it's just for freezing in time. It's like these are what happened to be on this shelf at that moment, kind of thing. Like, and I think that's cool. And don't get me wrong, I'm not like throw out all the other archives. Like, I think it's great that we've got Wikipedia and the Internet Archive, and like the. I mean, I was going to say the British Library. There's probably a lot wrong with that, but like there are good things about all of this stuff that I think it's nice to not lose information to history. But maybe also it's kind of nice. I sometimes kind of think it is nice that you can lose information to history as well. Like I like things being made on non-archival material so that they can kind of perish. I think that kind of thing is cool. And I also think with the archive, when you get these, I think sometimes you might have an exhibition and art. I mean, this is just one like obvious example, I suppose, but an artist might show an archive of the work of the materials they were reading whilst producing work. That kind of thing, I think, has a nice activity to it. I think ultimately, though, that they're only useful or important if they let everyone access them. I think if they're behind anything closed, or I think if they're kind of overly kind of like fussy, frozen in time, then they might as well not exist.
Absolutely. It's this kind of perverse desire for permanence.
Mm.
This question
And I
has
think ownership.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like whoever it's I mean I've been obsessing about this question and like reading the Derrida like archive fever, and early on he's talking about how like the archive is really sort of a form of congealed power over like the
Mm.
narrative of history, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, and it's like, and I think those kind of like impermanent archives, personal archives, like archives that can fall apart, or archives that can change, just anything that like, and basically I think a lot of it is that I think I can go deep into it on the academic level, but also I think I'm just like a 15-year-old contrarian that wants to be like, no, fuck you, let's do it a different way. Um because there's enough people, there's just enough people and enough kind of like powers invested in perpetuating those existing structures, kind of like the typical archive, the typical way of kind of like categorizing and storing information and holding it and controlling it, that that won't stop. So you don't need to worry, I think, about the information getting lost. And I think better to put where there's energy, put it into like different ways of making that information like available to people, and also different ways of having it different way of kind of like allowing connections between those bits of information. Looking out, looking back again. Last year, I spent a few days speaking with my mum about her growing up between places and between people. This year, I asked her how she found those conversations and what she thinks of looking back in this way. A document of my mum's formative years living between Sierra Leone, Lebanon, and England. Of loss, of longing, of belonging.
Thank you. Ah, so this is different than the last one I saw. We're inside of a
So this
like
this
a
in
vertical white rectangle, but it's hard to tell which way. It seems like we're looking down at this like distant shaft, but we're actually, if you look up, you're actually looking forward. It's really confusing.
so this was the addition. This was the kind of like revisiting um of the original looking out, looking over. This was looking out, looking back again, was kind of like an intro corridor in the kind of like physical sense. Where I went back and went through the space with my mum and asked her like how she felt about it, how it affected her, like if it had any effect. And actually it had quite a big effect on her. So that was cool.
I mean, I love it's so meta. It's really like a fractal of what we're trying to do with this festival. So I'm
Yeah,
really
I
delighted.
know, I realize it's quite funny.
Ah, so
That's her.
so we look back and we see a picture of Peter's mom. How would you describe this picture? Or because it's like I can say this is like a picture of a laughing woman in a dark sweater with shoulder length brown hair, and like with a cloth lavender background. But what does the picture bring up for you?
Um, so the picture, it was a photograph of me. Well, it was a photograph made when I was trying to take a new passport photo for my mum, and and she was laughing because it was quite funny, and she didn't like having a picture taken. And I just think again, for me, it captured this, in on a basic sense, this kind of like joyous thing of hers, but also a little bit of this like often she doesn't want to be seen, or often she'll think of a photograph of her as bad. Almost always she doesn't like a photograph of herself, but then she quite liked this photograph of her. And I did as well, and I think that was enough to put it up.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Thank you. So I'm looking up at looking out, looking back again, and we have this chat transcript over the top. I'm curious, is the text file uploaded to the catalog, or is this like a PNG?
I'd have to remember. I'm pretty sure it's a PNG, or is it a text file? No, I'm pretty sure it's a text file. I can double check, but like, yeah, from an accessibility
Yeah.
perspective, it could definitely be a text file.
Okay, great. Yeah, I want to make sure that's in here. So we're going down this hallway, but it really does feel like we're going down this long shaft, and we have this really long transcript all along this what we now understand is the ceiling. And we're going towards a door, and you can see the rotating New Art City portal cube. And so if we go back, then we will be transported to looking out, looking over. And so the floor is this sort of textured Google Images map, and you can see there's driving directions between Tyre and Sidon, which
Poseidon,
is
yeah,
this is Lebanon, right?
exactly, yeah. So this is showing the distance, the drive that's described in one of the videos when my mum was at boarding school in Lebanon during the Civil War, and the Civil War got bad enough that eventually my one of he would be my great I think he'd be my great great uncle. Um, Philip went to go and like basically collect my mum and her sister in a taxi and drive through what at the time was a war zone to get them um back to my where my granddad was meeting them. Um, and it's a heavy story for sure, and it's a heavy kind of thing to have grown to live through. Um, but also, at the end there's this joke in the video clip. There's this joke about how my great grandmother said, how stupid they were for driving through all of this dangerous space, and they could have died and stuff. And my granddad saying, yeah, but they're my daughters. I have to save them. But my great grandmother saying like, yeah, but they are only their daughters. They're not your sons. They don't matter. And it's miserable, but it's also, I don't know. There's something always with all these kind of like these heavy stories. There's always like a kind of cut of, I don't know, self-aware humor in the whole thing. It's sort of a, if you don't laugh, you cry, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean it's really intense. There and yeah, there's so much like emotion and memory there. And so as I look around from where we start, we see these two images that are smashed up against each other that look very three-dimensional. Like you see some lockers in what looks like a school hallway, and then there are some stairs, and another hallway. And then when I look in the other direction, I see all of this like sort of an arc of flat planes of images of the sky, and you can see there may be like a video underneath there. And then we have these are these lemon trees? Are they a specific
They're
type of tree?
orange trees.
And behind those orange trees is another video, and I see another grass angled plane behind with another image sort of or video floating on it with like a ring around it. Um, and so yeah, I mean there are lots of interviews in here. I would love to stroll around a bit. Or is there anything else you want to sort of say about how you built the world before we start listening to the interviews?
Um, Only that that I think not the entirety of the material in here, but almost everything else is, other than the videos, is pulled from Google Maps, Street View, Google Image Search. And the idea was that they're all these places that I have never known, that I'm so close to through my mum, but that I just I won't ever know. And even physically, like I haven't been to any of these places, and I would love to eventually. It's a That's another thing. I think my mum has quite a lot of sort of traumatic memories around a lot of them. And when we were children, she never wanted to go. Then when we got older, she did, but then there was civil war and it became difficult. But eventually, I'd like to go. But the point is that these materials are sort of like poor representations, I think, of the places being described and the places kind of like the settings for these memories. And I think it was kind of for me, it was kind of important that they were like that because yeah, of course, if you had budget, you could go and you could shoot beautiful footage of these places and set them as a backdrop. But that's not the point. The point is like my understanding of these places is through the stories that my mum tells, and by extension, through the internet. And I think it's kind of shown here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really relevant. And sort of especially having like the Google Street View be your eye into this, sort of having the sort of view from nowhere of the Google car. And I think this was such an incredible technique where like I'm looking at this conic hospital and it's just composed of a bunch of flat images, but it really has like a photogrammatic quality to it that there's all of these squares are forming an impression of the building that's not sort of necessarily reflected in just the geometry.
There was this all point and click game, Grim Fandango,
Oh,
and there's
yeah.
yeah, and there's one point in it. I think there's only one point, possibly two, where it's set in the land of the dead and so on and blah blah, and it's all 3D animated. But then there's one point they go to the land of the living, and everything is this sort of collaged caricature. It's sort of like an attempt at reality, but it's not. And I've been back and looked at it since, and it isn't a similar aesthetic to the one I had in my head. But the idea, I suppose, is one of how do you build up a kind of a structure or a world that you've never seen and you only know through stories. And I think I hope it's kind of like I guess like a compassionate representation of like as much as I could know kind of thing.
Yeah, it really like takes the shape of your memory, right? That
Hmm.
it's the images are in low resolution, but the words are in high resolution.
Hmm.
But that memories and when to look at the school, walking through that big front hall.
How do you feel?
Don't know really. It was just big. It was big and there's a lot of wood. And to the left was a big like room where they used to do plays and concerts and things like that at school. Um, yeah, I don't know, not much really. I can remember the layout of the place very well, and it had like a central garden bit, and then there were the houses, and then if you walked slightly up the hill there was where you used to go and eat, the dining room, and then if you carried on to the left, there was other school rooms. And I remember that because we used to have study at night, and one of the girls had been out in the sun all day and she had a fit in the study while we were studying. And I just remember her frothing at the mouth. My grandparents lived in one of the flats, and the top flat also was empty. So Daddy used to sleep up there, and then up there we had all our clothes and stuff like that, and then we'd play games up there, and she'd win stuff off us, take our stuff. But she took this bracelet, which made me very sad.
And that Grandpa's got.
No, that my uncle,
Oh,
Daddy's brother Habib, had got me. So that was sad. It was all sad.
do you remember how it looked? The bracelet?
Not really. I think it was this small, thin gold bracelet. Can't really remember, but I know I really liked it.
I mean, I think it's so interesting to see sort of the memories coming about in real time that like it's kind of still a manifestation of how memory functions in like an embodied sense.
I think like yeah, I hope it is that. I mean, that was the idea, at least in the sense of sort of I think at the extreme end, sort of leaving in your mistakes, like when when there's ums and there's ahs and there's misrememberings and stuff. But rather than trying to sort of polish or neaten the whole thing, just leave them in there, and also trying. I think part of why it was so long, or at least not the whole thing, but the recordings, why we spent so long on it, because I just wanted to leave a lot of space for that remembering. It's not like you're doing an interview with someone who's talking about something they did last week. It's like, okay, please now recount your entire life, and and you do really see that, like, one thing will be remembered and it will prompt a memory of another, and it will prompt a kind of alteration of a previous memory that has to get corrected, and so on. And yeah, these paths of kind of memories in the mind, I think, are then mirrored in these paths of like of across the world between the different places where my mum lived, and then I hope then mirrored again in the space where you move around in them.
Yeah, it's really yeah, all of these things are kind of uniting. Um, that like yeah, following the shape of memory, not sort of the shape of an event described through
Yeah,
memory.
yeah,
We had to put the tables that sort of on their sides and hide behind the tables, and we could hear all of these. We could hear all the fire shots and the bombs and everything, and then suddenly Uncle Philip turned up, and somehow he'd got a taxi all the way from Tyre to the school, and he must have gone to the house that Adele was at first, picked her up, and then came to ours, picked us up, and we drove back to Tyre, and it was so frightening because the sky was you could just see all the bullets firing over the taxi, and we got back to my grandparents' house. My grandmother was so angry with my Uncle Philip for putting himself in danger. And then my Daddy flew over from Freetown, and again he got a taxi from Beirut, which was all very dangerous. And when he got to the house, the flat, my grandmother shouted so much at him and said, "Why are you putting yourself at risk?" And he said that, "Oh, but they're my children." She said to him, "But they're only girls, they don't matter." Anyway, then we packed all our stuff and we went to Freetown. The Civil War started, so and that was very bad. We were doing a concert once, and then the air raid thing went off. Everybody ran, and they had all those chairs that flattened, and all the chairs were flattened. We all had to run to the shelter. We all made it to the shelter that time, and then the last time we were ever at school, it went off, and we were told to I think Adele was in the other house. There was Sierra and I in this house, and we had to hide behind. We had to put the tables that sort of on their sides and hide behind the tables, and we could hear all of these. We could hear all the fire shots and the bombs and everything, and
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to sort of come into a video midway and then find your way around the loop. And it's also interesting to hear about the
Yeah,
phenomena in the video and then see the video.
yeah. That's also the thing. I think, like, the fact that you have these. So on the technical level, initially it wasn't intentional, but the fact that you have videos just looping, and not necessarily, starting on by your presence. And so you come into things halfway through and a third of a way through and whatever. I quite like, because I think it just adds to this, I don't know, discovery and kind of like rebuilding and building of your own connections and stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, should we move to another space?
Yeah, sure. So there's three others, and they're all, I mean, extremely loosely thematically linked. I think to the point where I couldn't necessarily tell you what the thematic links are now. But again, I think it was largely a case of, I think, wanting to have some different kind of like atmospheres.
Mhm.
I think ultimately perhaps those thematic links are probably like emotional, or maybe weight. I would say there are some that are heavier than others.
Mhm. So let's go from left to right. This is looking
Yeah,
over, looking out. And each of these are inversions of that.
yeah,
Outlooking, looking over, overlooking, outlooking. So the fog is green here, and we're looking at a map of Africa. Yes?
yeah.
And it's kind of mirrored over this plane. There's a drive that's 85 hours. Oh, now this side is it's right. It's sort of North Africa. So we see Morocco and we say Spain and Portugal, and it's the drive from
So this is
Gibraltar to London.
so this is from Sierra Leone um to Warrington, where I grew up.
Oh, I see.
Oh,
Not
no, no,
London.
sorry, not for where I grew up. Warrington to Baldwin's Lane, which is one of the houses that my mum lived in.
And we're in this dense green fog, but I see some rose bushes and some swing sets that are all made out of these transparent PNGs that are arranged in these clever ways. So they're very, very dimensional. And then surrounding this playground is a crown of videos. We're inside of a box that's kind of Z fighting with itself, so it's very glitchy. There are these like paving stones and another gray texture that are glitching through it. A lot less sort of serene feeling than the previous one.
I hated milk. So Svea probably didn't feel as hungry as I did because she had milk. But what was surprising was I was fatter than Svea, which was weird really because she ate more.
What were you eating?
God knows. And then we always had pocket money, which we spent on a Sunday. We'd go to the shop and we'd buy comics and sweets. And Svea would always pretend she'd eaten her sweets. So when she'd say, I've eaten all mine, then I'd eat mine, and then she'd say, I haven't, and show me them, and I'd feel really like I wanted them. And then she was also, we used to play in the front room, and we played dressing up, and when we finished and it was all a mess, she'd say, now I'm the queen and you're my servant. So she'd make me tidy it all up. And then the other memory was the detective thing. But it was just so nice being allowed to stay up and watch the telly. Because every other day we had to go to bed quite early, about 7 o'clock. and we didn't have a supper. We just had this sort of light tea when we came back from school, because people used to think that children shouldn't eat heavy things late at night. And then I could always smell their food downstairs, like roast chicken or whatever they were having. And I used to feel so hungry. Oh, everything was different, yes, of course, because like being in Freetown, it was hot. That was another thing, and you didn't wear many clothes, and everything was freer and really nice. Because again, when we were here, when we were in England with our grandparents, they didn't like us to go out. So when all the children would play outside, we weren't allowed to play outside because they were worried that something would happen to us because they were looking after us. But the nicest times, the garden, I hated it. It scared me so much. And she chased me in the garage with it and cornered me. And it was so frightening.
There is something about the quietness of the voice where it's like sort of demanding more like deep listening. It feels appropriate.
Old women,
I think
very
that was
scary.
an unintentional consequence, I think, but
There
it does help.
Probably two-ish. Because there is a picture of me lying in the cot, so that I've seen since.
And then, do you remember, like, what's your earliest memory apart from the dream?
Then another memory I have is being taken to nursery school and really not liking it, and the teacher was horrible, and I wanted to go home. And then I also remember being smacked by my dad for coming out of the bathroom with my underpants on when we had workers working. But I was only probably about 3.
Do you remember what you said?
No, he was just angry. Oh, and also I remember a nice memory. I remember standing on the balcony, and then people would go by selling fresh baked bread, and I'd ask if I could have it, and I'd just eat the hot white inside bit. That and roasted peanuts. So everybody sold roasted peanuts there, which were delicious. And those are the main memories there. And then the next memory, which is a strong memory, is being put on a plane with my older sister to come and live with my grandparents and auntie in England.
How old were you then?
I was 4 to 4.5, and we got put on a plane with, travelling at the same time as a friend of my dad's called Henny Hersham. And I just remember being on the plane and looking out of the window and feeling really sad and empty and horrible. But then I don't remember when I arrived in England what it was like. And so I asked my Auntie Pat much later on in life, what was it like? And she said when they picked us up from, it was either Heathrow or Gatwick, we were like 2 lost souls. So I asked her what they did, and she said, we just kept you up talking till you were so tired that you'd just go to sleep. So then we just fell asleep. My first memory, I think, was being asleep in a cot, because we all slept in the same.
These are so like enthralling and beguiling.
I mean, it's hard because some of them are talking about eating some hot bread, and then the others are talking. I mean, that one was talking about both the hot bread and also mum, them coming back. I think from not long after my mum's mum had died when
It feels,
they were little.
yeah, it feels so much more like it's like reality versus realism. It feels like this is so much more reflective of like a reality of sensation rather than kind of like a historical narrative. I always think about like the composites of memories that are like half photographs that you didn't take or that you don't remember being taken.
Exactly. I think, yeah. I hope that. I think in a way, although there was some intention for that to come across, it feels like something that wasn't tangibly something that you could really make happen. It just sort of like emerged out of just doing the work and having the interviews and kind of putting them together, cutting what I felt feels kind of right.
Hmm. So we're now in overlooking, outlooking, and the fog is this dark tangerine color, and now the map floor is sort of inverted colors where the ocean is orange, and then this map with Italy and the Mediterranean is orange. And so I'm trying to find a spot where I can.
I think
read this. So now
So
this is,
this would have been Sierra Leone going to Beirut
oh, I see.
by
Yeah,
plane.
114 hours, something
Yeah,
like maybe 2,800 kilometers.
exactly. Yeah, I think it's also like showing the driving. Uh, although they would have flown, but showing the kind of driving distance to show I suppose the huge distances to be living for these to be places to be living between.
Hmm. And so there are a lot of pictures of like a neighborhood that are stitched together. And so there's a street sign. It must be towards like a roundabout maybe, but it says Magduche. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
I'm also not sure actually. The all of the kind of these are all Google Street views of places where my mum grew up,
Hmm.
and also where I grew up. So these are basically cut between sort of Warrington in the northwest of England and Tyre in Lebanon, and also Freetown in Sierra Leone.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to see this like juxtaposition of palm trees and this sort of wooded hillside with a bunch of buildings on it, and then these like very sort of normal suburban type houses that are mostly made out of brick with this like hedgerow um, and these like highways with cedars and then more suburban places. And it's like it's quite difficult to tell exactly like where is where. And there are just like a bunch of these kind of intersecting with one another, forming the boundaries of the space that we're in.
Anyway, she took me to the shop, and I was so pleased. Tried on this skirt, and it was really nice. I was really excited, and I came out and she said to me in Arabic, "Yeah, that's lovely. It fits you really well." And I couldn't believe it. I actually thought she was going to buy it for me. And then she looked at me and she said, "Well, you can save up for it now, can't you?" And I just felt so, just like, devastated and also upset with myself for, I mean, I was only like 14, but upset with myself for just relying on somebody to make me feel good. But all of these things, to be honest, they just taught me to be completely self-reliant and not expect happiness from anywhere apart, really, from internally.
It's interesting that sort of like the jump between the last video we watched and this one is about 10 years, and to see the way
Yeah,
the feelings that infuse the memory are so much more like narrativized than when she was 4.
totally.
Too long for one house. I thought we'd be here 5.
I think because we're sort of coming towards time, so I want to make sure that we get into the last
Yeah,
space.
let's jump on the last one,
Yeah.
and this was part of the point of doing this naming convention that you do get lost, but now I can't remember which.
I think it's outlooking, overlooking.
I think
We'll
it
know
is.
because of the color.
It is, yeah. Good.
Yeah, so now this one is very dark with like a night sky twinkling above, similar inverted map, and this one is now.
This one is.
Van didn't go to.
Oh, it looks again like it's somewhere in Lebanon to somewhere in the UK.
Yeah, the way the map is tiled, it looks almost Rorschach-y, and then it forms these little, yeah, the way the lines kind of converge on each other in these square patterns. It's definitely pretty disorienting.
Yeah, that was the intention, I think.
And then
So the different thing I'm seeing in here is we have a lot of boxes where must be like a video text or something where like images are scrolling around the box. So this is of some concrete, and then there's one that's looks to be some kind of satin that's red, marble, this like sandstone, like ocean water, and I wonder if there are videos inside of these. Oh wow, so the outside of the box is this texture, and then the inside the whole box is a video. That's really cool.
there were various holidays in between all of that. And Yeah, so we actually had quite a nice summer, a really free summer that we just went swimming all the time. And I couldn't swim, so Daddy just threw me in this pool. And then I learned how to swim pretty quickly. And I think he also got a nanny, an older lady at the time, and she was really nice, forget her name. And then he had another auntie, forget her name, Hannah. And she organised bought us all loads of new clothes and stuff to go to boarding school, ready to go to boarding school in Lebanon.
Do you remember what, like, after our granny died, your mum, what you, and those talk about you staying in Birmingham or going to school in Lebanon, do you remember anything of what you wanted? Or
I think I probably wanted to stay in England. Because it's so, we didn't know what you felt. Nobody actually asked, what did you feel? Nobody actually came up and said, how are you, for all three of us, are you sad? Or there was just nothing. It was all just, you just got, just get on. And
now, do you remember you saying about Jim being practical? Was everyone being practical?
yes, everybody was quite practical.
But not emotional.
They didn't. Daddy was very emotional. He was always crying at that time. But I don't think. I mean, he was only 30.
Wow.
How old would Daddy have been then? About 33, 34. So he was young. He was young, and he had 3 young kids, and he'd lost his wife, and he knew he had to work. He had no option but to go to work. So yeah.
It's really interesting to sort of come at this story from all of these moments where you really don't know whether you're going to get something so quotidian or like learn one of these details. It's like,
Yeah.
it's such a different way of hearing a story. I've never, and I haven't spent this much time with the piece before, and it's like, it's very special to be kind of experiencing it for the first time together.
Yeah, it's kind of great. I think if there was one thing in here to see is maybe just the huge video about nostalgia.
Ooh.
I think I haven't got a burning desire. I don't think before I die I want to go back to these places. I feel that they're in the past. They were part of my life, but they no longer are part of my life. And I don't have to, I think sometimes revisiting something, nostalgia isn't such a good thing. I think you have to accept that you have these memories, and they are just memories, and those memories shouldn't take over. And I think by revisiting them, you could open up cans of worms and open yourself up to feeling unhappy again, and I don't really want that. I haven't got a burning desire. Except
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting where you're also like kind of curating these moments from this like massive interviews. And I mean, I'm sure like a lot of these moments and juxtapositions are intentional, right?
Yeah, there are definitely some, like especially here, for example, probably more so than in others. But a lot of it was also freeform. Part of the way was also, for example, in the green space, and probably the green and the orange space the most. That was where I was sort of importing videos, having already kind of cut things to kind of these 2-3 minute sections about a specific point or a specific memory, and then just kind of semi-randomly arranging them until it kind of made sense.
So it's like the curation is happening more in time than space.
Yeah, I would say.
Well, I think it's great that, the catalog is another way to be experiencing these in a semi-random order. And I love that like the medium is very much bass or like the audio experience, I think is like really resonant on its own. So I'm super glad that we did this.
Yeah, same.